if you are new to finding out about the Harris Center, I'll just give you a quick introduction. The Harris Center is a small land trust in southwestern New Hampshire, where we are actively protecting over about 25,000 acres of land, and we work with people of all ages from all walks of life. And our real goal is to help people fall in love with this place that we call our home. And tonight, we are really excited to have a wonderful speaker, Cynthia Nichols, who Brett and I have worked with in the past as a conservation biologist. I always think of Cynthia as our bat woman because she helped start the bat monitoring program that the Harris Center does. And she also was one of the original starters of our Young Birders Club called the Harriers, which is now called the Kestrels. So, and many other things that Cynthia does. I don't even know all the things she's done. And she's going to talk a little bit about herself. So it's really my pleasure this evening to introduce Cynthia Nichols, who is not just a conservation biologist, she's also a practicing nurse, and she's going to be talking about something that affects all of us, and that's climate change and health. And she is going to talk about the organization that she's presenting for too as well. So thank you, Cynthia, for being here tonight, and we're really excited to hear what you have to say on this really important topic.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here as well. I have a love for the Harris Center. I have some of my bat friends here that people have given me over the years. My natural history side runs deep, and I'm so excited to be able to participate with you guys on different citizen science projects. And even as I've gone on to nursing, the part about being able to be here that's so exciting is bringing the health perspective into the issue of climate change. And I will, shall I just go ahead and start sharing my screen? Okay, so I do have a presentation that we put together. Let's see if that works. All set? Everybody can see it? Okay, great. So I don't know about you all, but we just had Thanksgiving, and a lot of times at the dinner table or around different colleagues, climate change is a pretty tough topic. What I like about talking about it with the lens of health impacts is that health is apolitical most of the time, and it's something that is really, really important to all of us. So being able to talk about climate change from that lens provides us an opportunity to be able to maybe talk to friends that we wouldn't normally talk to about climate change. And it's a vital issue right now. So why I am here, as I mentioned, bringing climate change issues into the perspective of thinking about our health is why I'm here. And that's on my professional level. On my personal level, this is my family. These are the nieces and nephews from, this picture's like 10 years ago. Some of these folks are getting married, and soon they'll be having their own children. I want them to have the planet that I grew up with, the place that I went hiking during the fall, where I get my maple syrup and I get to enjoy skiing. I want them to be able to enjoy all of that and have a healthy planet for their own health. And then this little yellow warbler represents my natural history side. I did conservation biology before becoming a nurse, and these yellow warblers, this little map below him shows where he needs to be able to go during his life cycle. So he doesn't need just our healthy Northeast. He needs the entire North American and South American habitats to be healthy. So it's my family, it's all the flora and fauna, and I really, really want to be able to protect it. So what I'll do today is I'm going to talk about the health impacts of climate change, as I've said. I will start with a little bit of basic information about climate change, because I think it's just nice for us all to have in our back pocket when we are having those conversations. And then we'll go on to talk about specific impacts to human health, and some that are really important here in New Hampshire, specifically air quality, extreme weather systems, heat, believe it or not, and vector ecology. We'll get into that in more detail. So just some basics about climate change. People will say, well, it's warm out today. it's a normal summer day, or, you know, it's fall and it's nice and cool. What are you talking about? So the reason they changed the terminology from global warming is that it's not just about the planet warming up. It's about the planet's climate patterns changing. And it's all about a change in average conditions, such as temperature and rainfall, not just today's weather or tomorrow's weather. It's about trends. And if you look at this graph, this is a graph from 1880 until the 2000s, and you can see this average temperature has gone up already 2 degrees Fahrenheit. The Earth's surface has been warming with many of the warmest years happening in the last 20 years. And we're already up that 2 degrees Fahrenheit, as I mentioned. So it's about trends. And if you looked at some of the people will say, well, what about the sun cycles? What about the geological cycles? Well, if you looked at the sun cycles, for example, we should actually be cooling off. And, you know, so you can say that this is not about the big geological cycles. This is about our atmosphere. And this is what we all saw in grade school. You know, this atmosphere is a real bonus to this planet. We wouldn't be here without it. It provides our oxygen. It provides the ability for heat to be trapped, to be able to have us evolve over time, to grow, to have photosynthesis, to have the energy that we need, and for flora and fauna to have evolved. However, when you change the molecules in the atmosphere, it's basic physics. That's what's been changing our atmosphere to create more of this greenhouse gas effect. It's just that simple. We have a physicist who can tell you so much about astrophysics. He's fascinating on our Healthcare Workers for Climate Action group. And he'll say, look, it's just this basic. That's all you need to understand. This is a graph showing the amount of carbon dioxide in ice core samples. Those ice core samples have been providing data that goes back 800,000 years. You can see from this that we were below 300 up until the 1950s. So again, if people say, you know, what about the geological cycles? Well, you can say for the last 800,000 years, it was below 300, but now it's changed. And this can be directly attributed to fossil fuels. This article is really interesting because it's from 1912. And they were noting that, you know, if we're putting this amount of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, we're going to be increasing the warming blanket that covers the Earth, and we're going to raise its temperature. So it's not like this is a new idea. And I know, again, this is very basic information, but sometimes it's just easier just to keep it very simple and direct. The United Nations International Panel on Climate Change puts out periodic assessments. And for a long time, they were careful about what they said because scientists need to be careful. Again, we're talking about trends. We're not talking about yesterday's weather or even a year from now. So they need to be careful. But in what they did finally was come out with a statement in the 6th assessment saying that this is unequivocally due to human activity. The 2 degrees Fahrenheit that we've gone up has equals 1.1 degrees Celsius. That's an important number to remember because we want to stay under 1.5 degrees Celsius. That is the number that we think that we can be adaptable with and that we can manage. So the global warming is happening here and now. It's not somewhere in the future. It's not in some other part of the planet. It's actually happening here. As mentioned, the last 20 years have been some of the warmest on record. The glacial retreat is happening. Sea level rise is happening faster than any time in the prior 3,000 years. And one of the things that's happening in the Northeast is that we're still having a little bit of rebound from the glaciers. So we are actually, the land is rising a little bit, but we are still having sea level rise. So if we're having that amount of sea level rise, it's really impactful. It's really happening. That's what I mean. The ocean is warming pretty darn fast. There was a day last summer when the water off Florida was 100 degrees. So again, it's happening here and it's happening now. And then this is a graph that shows where we want to be. So if you look at this blue line on the bottom, we want to get down 1.5 degrees Celsius. And we're looking at the 2005 data about fossil fuel and CO2 in the atmosphere. The goal is to get down to 50% of that by 2030, and then down to net zero by 2050. If we can do that, they think we can stay at that 1.5 degrees Celsius. And this has all been agreed upon at the COP meetings, the Paris Agreement in 2015. Many nations around the world came together and came to an agreement that they will aim towards this 1.5 degrees Celsius. I bring this up because today's an auspicious day. The current COP meeting started today, and they are going to be addressing where everybody is in their nationally determined commitments, NDCs. So everybody made commitments about what they would do to be able to reach a net zero by 2050. So the UN is really, the head of the UN is very concerned because he says that we need to actually be acting a lot faster. I'm leaving this graph up because this orange line shows our pledged policies and our current policies. You could see that the current policies are still a little higher than the pledge policies even, but you can also see by that blue line that we need to be moving further down. So something to pay attention to is that COP meeting and see what those nationally determined commitments come in at. It's nice that they're nationally determined. It means that the countries are deciding what they can do. And you always want people to be, you know, motivated by what their decisions are. So that's why they did it that way. Okay, enough of that. Climate change information. We're going to move on into the health part of this because this is the lens that we hope will make an impact when we're talking to people. I mentioned that, you know, people are I didn't really say it yet. People are really becoming more aware of the fact that climate change is impacting health. This editorial went out in the New England Journal of Medicine to 200 journals all at once. This was about 3 years ago, recognizing that climate is one of our greatest public health issues right now. That was an event that had never happened before for the New England Journal of Medicine to do that. And then I did mention the COP28. Well, the COP28, the World Health Organization, has asked them to recognize in this meeting that health is one of the most important things we need to address. Health needs to be front and center of the national plans. And they've declared that December 3rd will be the first, a day totally dedicated to health. And this is the first time this has happened. So it's really coming to the fore of people's awareness. So you are right on the cusp. Now this chart is super handy because it puts it all in one nutshell, and you can download this anywhere online. It shows in the center. So we have our increasing CO2, which increases our temperatures, causes more extreme weather and sea level rise. But then as you move out from the center, you can see what that does. So that causes more severe weather. What does severe weather do? You keep going out, it says it causes more injuries, fatalities, and mental health impacts. And that's how this graph is very useful. If you look at air pollution and increasing allergens, they both are going to impact respiratory situations. Changes in vector ecology, we're all very aware of Lyme disease here in the Northeast, but there's also, besides Lyme disease, ticks can carry other diseases, and changes in mosquito ecology is also going to increase the amount of diseases that are carried. Heat-related illnesses, you might be surprised at some of the issues there. They can cause heat exhaustion, heat stroke. I mean, heat can cause heat exhaustion, heat stroke, and actually cardiovascular issues. I'll talk more about that. And then, of course, you've got water quality and water and food supply impacts. You could have, after storms with flooding, you can have impacts to the water quality that can spread disease. You could have stored chemicals that will be accidentally released in that flood water, and then that's carried into soils. And then the water quality, of course, decreases, and you can have malnutrition and diarrheal disease. The diarrheal disease from the water quality, malnutrition because the actual food supply chain can be impacted. So environmental degradation can in turn cause forced migration and civil conflict. We've seen that more in South Africa, but here people are concerned about environmental migration. People coming to the Northeast because we're somewhat in a sweet spot, not perfect, but we are in a better spot than places like in the Southwest in terms of our the things that we're feeling related to climate change. So now I will go into some specifics for the Northeast. I mentioned air quality. We'll talk about heat and extreme weather as well. So air quality. Now, when you burn fossil fuels, you get actual particulates in the air. You also, with the heat, you get increased ozone level at the surface. That in our atmosphere is a great thing, but when you have ozone increases at the ground level, that is an irritant to your bronchi and to your lungs, actually. Nitrogen dioxide and sulfur dioxide are as well, and those are in fossil fuel emissions. Now, the particulate matter is really interesting. These are actual little particles in the air. They've got that 10 micron, the 2.5 micron, and the 0.1 micron. The 10 micron, you see this human hair over here. That's 1/5 to 1/7 of a human hair. That will normally be taken care of by your nostrils and your bronchus, which goes from towards your lungs. But while your lungs are dealing with that, they cannot be protecting you from bacteria and viral infections. The smaller, I'm going to go back one, the smaller particles, the 0.2, the 0.25 and the 0.1 can actually cross into your bloodstream. So down into your lungs and into your bloodstream. Those particulate matters can then cause blood clots, inflammation. The blood clots can in turn cause stroke and heart attack. Of course, the irritants in your lungs can cause lung cancer. It can cause worsening COPD. That's the top one there. COPD is chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. And if you look at air quality indexes, you can predict that you're going to have more admissions into the ED with COPD problems on hot days because they have people with COPD have a lot more trouble managing the heat, and the air quality is often worse on hot days. And it causes more admissions into the ED. You can also have increased risk of dementia, it can cause pregnancy complications and actually cognitive and behavioral problems in children. So it's really important for teachers to be aware of the air quality index for planning recesses and making sure that their kids are, going out at better times of the day. I think we were all aware of the wildfires this summer, which is unusual for us in the Northeast. If I gave this talk last summer, we wouldn't be talking about that. But we had the wildfires in northern Canada, and I grew up there part-time. I would never imagine that humid, lush green landscape having issues with wildfires, but they sure did this year because of some ongoing drought. Now, the particulate matter in wildfires can be less than 10 microns. And if you remember from our past slides, that is, if it's smaller than 10 microns, it might even get into your bloodstream, but it will certainly cause bronchial problems and exacerbate anything, any kind of issues that you have with COPD and asthma. I didn't mention asthma before, but that will, of course, cause increased admissions again. Here is an example of what the air quality was like in June of 2023 this year. You can see all those red spots in the Northeast. I think we all remember that. So when you look at public health impacts, this is how, the Department of Health and Human Services decides if something's important. And you look at particulate matter less than 2.5 in the ozone. Those can both cause premature deaths, emergency room visits, I mentioned, particulate matter, look at that, 221, lost work days, acute respiratory symptoms, and the total valuation. A lot of times, if you get down to the brass tacks, this will make an impact on people. This was in 2017, the $3.7 billion in healthcare costs. It's a lot of money. And that gets to the benefits of the Clean Air Act, because when the Clean Air Act was first, discussed and put into place by a Republican majority, there was concern that it would be too costly. But it's a really, really interesting, if we look back at the cost of air pollution, and then you look at the benefits of the Clean Air Act since 1970, the major pollutants were reduced by 73%. So this is another good story because it shows that we can make a difference. There were 230,000 fewer deaths per year, 2.4 million fewer asthma attacks per year, 200,000 fewer heart attacks per year, and the less hospitalizations because of COPD. Now look at that. Benefits, the cost benefits were payback of 30-fold compared to implementing these changes. So that's a good, a happy ending story to share. Oops. Now, and then another thing that comes up a lot with these climate issues, climate and health issues, are social justice issues, because of the way because of redlining and the way our cities were built up. Oftentimes, unfortunately, economically poor communities are in areas that'll be next to industrial areas or near airports. So they're going to be dealing with worse air conditions, and populations of color are 3 times more likely to live in areas with unhealthy air. This is more good news about the zero emission energy. If we transition to zero emission energy, then we could save all of this money, the 1.2 trillion, prevent premature deaths, and increase our work days. But I think the more important piece of this slide is the fact that this is a social justice issue. So for each of these health issues, we added adaptation slides because we wanted to talk about how we can manage it. And like I said, we're really hoping as a community, as a society, that if we can stay under 1.5 degrees Celsius of temperature increase, that we can adapt. So one of the things we could do is be aware of our air quality. There are indexes available online every day. And a lot of ERs will actually look up the air quality and put it up on the board so that people can plan ahead. Teachers can do that. People that have are running, doing track and field, coaches should do that. People that have people working outside should do that. If we anticipate the climate impacts, we can assess our vulnerabilities and we can address those. Electrify, electrify, electrify. The more we could do that, the less we're going to be burning the fossil fuels. And reducing vehicular emissions. There's a lot of work going on to limit engine idling. And, wouldn't it be lovely if we could all live somewhere where we could walk or bike to work? Looking for places to live where you could do more of that, or just doing less driving, maybe putting all your driving into all your errands into Saturdays and no driving on Sundays or something like that. I try to do 1 day a week where I don't drive. So from air quality, we'll move on to extreme weather events. Extreme weather is anything to like any of the weather events. That would be rainfall, floods, storms, drought as well. Because of climate change, not just global warming, but climate change, all of these are going to be more frequent and more intense. So the problem is that they can actually exacerbate underlying medical conditions. So if you're somebody that's home and you have difficulty walking, you need a wheelchair or you need to use a walker, you can imagine trying to think about evacuating during a flood. That could be really difficult. If you need medications and you can't get those medications because you're stuck because of the flood, again, that's going to exacerbate your underlying medical condition. So it's really important for vulnerable people at home to think about what they need to do in terms of extreme weather events. All of us have had to deal with power outages our whole life, and we're really good at planning for that. So we need to like put those pieces into place for the extreme weather events. Unfortunately, it can increase stress, and that can lead to adverse mental health effects. People with PTSD already have a really difficult time with extreme weather events. 8% of men with PTSD, oftentimes it will get worse during extreme weather events. And then it can disrupt our public health system. A lot of hospitals have their equipment in the basement level. I know of a hospital in Manchester where during one of the freezes, they had pipes burst in the ICU. They're still dealing with managing that situation because they had to move all their patients out of there. Excuse me. They're doing repairs on that ICU still. And that was all due to one cold snap. And then, of course, it could disrupt ambulances actually getting to patients or getting back to the hospital. So now this is a map that shows increased precipitation across the country. You might notice this increase in the Northeast is 71% for heavy downpours. I don't think anybody who was here last summer would be surprised by that. We had the wettest summer ever since they've been recording our rainfall last summer in 2023. Funny enough, the previous summer was the hottest summer on record in New Hampshire. Now, if you look back at this slide, the 71% can be accounted for a lot by that increase in the warmth in the atmosphere. For every 1 degree Fahrenheit, you get a 4% increase in the amount of moisture that the air can absorb. So here we are getting more precipitation with extreme weather events in the Northeast. And then we also have the coastline. Now, so for us inland, we're dealing with the flooding streams and the flooding wetlands and ponds. And then on the coastline, if you've got that all coming down to the coastline as well as the sea level rise, you can have a lot of issues. You can see by this graph that it's been going up since 1970. And on the coastline, they have to deal with what's called nuisance flooding. Just with there's a high tide along with the full moon, you can have just a little bit of flooding down on the coastline, and that's becoming more and more frequent. So coastal areas like Portsmouth are having to plan better, put together like a climate action plan to look at how they're going to manage that on a routine basis. This is talking about the same thing. So it's predicted to be 10 to 14 inches for the East Coast in the next 30 years. On our little teeny part of the coastline, because we do have a small coastline compared to other states, we've got 2,500 properties at risk. And the storm surges coming further inland can actually bring salt water inland, and that causes soil damage. And they, of course, as we've been talking about, it'll happen more frequently. In terms of health effects, so we get back to the immediate event can cause accidents and traumatic injury, of course. But then there's that viral and bacterial contamination because the wastewater systems are not built to handle this. And you've got all those floodwaters mixing with the wastewater. You're going to have more contaminants of your water systems, and people getting fresh water is a problem after that, and increased mental health problems. I have a friend whose house has been flooded twice in the last 5 years. It hadn't been flooded in 100 years. And every spring she is like really, really stressed. We just added this slide in here because it's kind of interesting it's part of the whole flooding drought cycle. We've been getting a lot more toxic algal blooms. In terms of human health, they can cause rashes, stomach or liver illness if you accidentally take the water in, respiratory problems, and even neurological effects. And as I think most of us know, it's very harmful to pets to drink water that's got cyanobacteria in it. The way this is connected to climate change is that after a lot of times after extreme storms, you might have warm days after that. You've got water flooded into shallow areas. That water is very warm. You have, with that flood water comes all of these nutrients, the agricultural runoff, the stormwater runoff, wastewater runoff. All those nutrients going into the water systems is what gives the food to the algae. And then the algae bloom, and what do? They make the water absorb more heat, more sunlight, more heat, warmer water goes to increased algae, and you get this cycle going. So it's all connected. This is, again, when talking to people about climate change, if you want to get it down to economics, looking at, and I think a lot of insurance companies have been paying attention to this for a while, looking at the number of billion-dollar disasters that have occurred since 1980 up until 2021. It's really, really increased. In 2020, we had 22 events. In 2021, we had approximately 20. And if you look at that green part of the bar, that is the severe storm count. So that's like the severe winter storms, the severe precipitation events. So it's costing us a lot of money. How do we prepare? Well, I hinted at this earlier. Knowing what your situation is probably the most important thing. Knowing what you need, being aware, paying attention to what's going on with the weather. You can get reverse 911. You can also get alerts on your phones. You want to stay connected to your community, know where the warming and cooling shelters are. And if you have somebody in your family that is a vulnerable person that has more health issues than not, you can actually call your local emergency management team, call 911. You can call the non-emergency number and let them know. Say, you know, my uncle lives with us. He is on oxygen. When we lose power, we really need to get some support for that. Or he is in a wheelchair and we really need help evacuating in case of an emergency. Also, you know, get extra meds in the house, put a stay kit together. You want to be prepared for at least 3 days of not getting help. And then if you need to evacuate, you want to have that same stuff in the go bag. Have an evacuation plan. If you have a home generator, it's a good idea to know how to use it. There's a lot of people that, you know, have had one in the garage forever and it's in the back and they don't know how to use it. Or, you know, I had a patient who said, oh yeah, I've got a generator, and he was like 75, and it's like, well, do you know how to set it up? No, but my neighbor does. She was 80. She's gonna come over to his house, help him drag it out of the garage and get it set up, you know. I mean, so one thing that we have in New Hampshire is a lot of hardy, strong individuals who are used to being independent, which is great, but sometimes it can be a little bit, you know, get in their own way because they think they know how to do everything. So it's just good to plan ahead a little bit, make sure you know how to use that generator, make sure you've checked it out properly. Yeah, and then Ready NH. So that's a website that has a lot of really good information on it. Okay, so let's see, how are we doing on time? We're doing okay, and we want to leave some time for questions at the end. So extreme temperatures. This is from 2020. We had 7 more days of heat already in Concord as of 2020. Like I mentioned, last summer, 2022 was the hottest summer on record. We had 2 back-to-back heat waves, believe it or not. And then, you know, we've got this warming isn't just happening in the summertime. We've got an increase in our fall temperatures and increase in our winter temperatures too. Some people are really surprised by this. I know I was when I first learned it. that heat is actually the #1 cause of fatalities out of all the extreme weather events. And it's increasing more in recent years, no surprise there. You could see the numbers here. Heat has more impact than floods or cold temperatures or tornadoes. And it's because, you know, we as human beings like to exist in a very narrow range of temperature. We're happy at that 98.6. When it's a little colder, we have to put on clothes. If it's a little too hot, we have to take clothes off. Heat problems present as heat exhaustion or heat stroke. And by the time you're at heat stroke, you're really at risk of having severe injury and even maybe dying. The most important thing for preventing this is prevention. So making sure to stay hydrated, making sure that if you're going to be outside, that you've got somewhere to stay cool, and paying attention to your family members or older family members, because they have different, as you age, you change the way your body can actually adapt to heat. You can't shuttle the blood to your skin as well, and your sweating changes. I'll tell you why that's important in a second, but I'll just give you these quick heat exhaustion, heat stroke symptoms to look for. Thirst. By the time you're thirsty, it means you've gone past the point of needing hydration. That's one thing that a lot of people don't know. Like when you've got that thirst thing, that means you're already dehydrated. If people are weak or dizzy, what's happening is their blood is shuttling to the skin surface, so your vessels are dilating and trying to let that heat go, and that can make you dizzy. You can get cramps and headaches because you're dehydrated, nausea and vomiting, and profuse sweating, because sweating, sending the blood to your skin surface and then sweating are how we cool off. If people are starting to get confused, that's a really bad sign. And if your skin is actually dry, or I'm not sure why they say moist there, but if it's actually dry, that means you're really not being able to get rid of your heat through sweating. One of the problems we have here in the Northeast is the humidity. So the reason sweat helps you cool off is this actual heat of evaporation. As the moisture turns into vapor, it releases heat. If there's moisture in the air, it can't do that. And so that's why humidity makes it harder for us to cool off. The people that are at risk for heat injury are, of course, the high school and college athletes, agricultural workers, construction workers, landscapers, transportation people. Those guys that's pretty obvious. And we want to make sure that workers have a place to cool off, that they're hydrated, they're allowed breaks. But then maybe inner city populations, I don't know if everybody thinks about that, but there's actually this heat island effect in cities because it absorbs more moisture. There's a lot of work going into making cooler pavements and cooler roofs and doing urban forestry, which I just love, because the more trees helps to cool, obviously by creating shade, but you're actually also cooling the pavement underneath and the buildings next to the trees, and then absorbing the moisture out of the air and filtering particulate matter. So trees are just amazing. The children and infants have a harder time, and that's mostly because they can't adapt themselves. Somebody else is taking care of them, and they need help to adapt to the heat. And then the elderly, again, is because they can't manage heat the same way. Their body is changing. So for the elderly, it's really important to stay hydrated and cool. And then also making sure that you know about your medications, because some medications actually change how you can manage heat. Here's our heat adaptation slide. I think I've mentioned most of these. Of course, being aware, and then infrastructure improvements. Did I say in Manchester they're doing an urban forestry project? It's really exciting. Can you tell I'm excited by that? I'd love to get more into that. We shall move on to mosquitoes and tick-borne infections. I don't think this is any surprise to you all here. They call it vector-borne disease, which means something that's moving and carrying disease. And ticks and fleas and mosquitoes are what we're worried about most in the Northeast. tick-borne diseases, there's Lyme disease, of course, but then there's also these other three that not everybody knows about: anaplasmosis, babesiosis, and Powassan infection. The most important thing, if you get bit by a tick, if it's if you've had it for less than 24 hours, that is most likely going to protect you from getting an infection. If it's more than 24 hours, it usually has to, sorry, I'm not saying this well. If you are bit by a tick and you know that it's been on you for more than 24 hours, it's after that 24-hour mark when disease is transmitted. That's what I'm trying to say. If it's less than 24 hours, you're probably not as much at risk. However, if you are bit, you should let your provider know, and you can take doxycycline as a preventative, and it's very effective, and it's very effective early on. So if you get a tick bite, just call your provider. This is the increase in ticks in the Northeast in the past since 1996. It looks like Massachusetts has been spared, but that's just because of the way the data was presented, unfortunately. Why has this changed and why is it linked to climate change? Is because it changes the insect's life cycle. The more frost-free days, the more life cycle chances they have. And anything under 45 degrees Fahrenheit is fair game for ticks to be out and about. The best thing you can do is prevention. This is the perfect outfit to wear: light colored clothing, pants tucked into your socks. None of you guys will be surprised by that. But one of the tricks, I can't even remember, I think it might have been Brett or Polly actually that told me this, is using those sticky tape lint removers. I bring one of those in the car, I have it with me all the time, and I roll it on my pants and after I'm out walking in the woods. And I have found those little bitty nymph size ticks on that sticky tape. It's amazing. Again, call your doctor if you've been bit, if you have any concerns at all, and they'll probably just give you doxycycline. So mental health. I mentioned earlier that people with existing mental health problems, when they're subjected to these extreme weather events, it's very, very, very stressful. I mean, imagine anybody losing your home or having to deal with fixing your home after that, or having to evacuate. And then there's just climate anxiety. People are very nervous about climate change. One of the best ways that we can deal with climate anxiety is to realize that it's a perfectly normal response. And there are solutions. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Following a healthy lifestyle helps you deal with mental health issues in general. Building up social supports is really important for positive mental health. And one of the best things that, of course, I'm going to suggest everybody should do is becoming more involved in climate action, but doing something often decreases stress. I know that for me, being in nursing and not in the conservation biology world anymore, and seeing all of this happening with the climate was really stressing me out. And I wanted to do something. Ever since I've gotten involved with doing this through my Healthcare Workers for Climate Action, it has made me feel like I am doing something, and at least I can maybe spread the word. Other people will be doing things. We can take care of this. Like I was mentioning, the Clean Air Act was something that we all worked on and made happen, and it really improved the air quality. There's a lot of positive conservation stories like bald eagles. You know, the more that we think about it and the more that everybody takes part, the more possible it is that we can take care of this. Harris Center people will not be surprised to hear that being out in nature is just plain good for your mental health. And it's actually being shown in research projects. The British are always ahead of us on these kinds of things, and indeed they are ahead of us on this one. Spending 2 or more hours in nature in the past week was associated with reporting good health and well-being by 20,000 participants. Increased frequency of visits to green spaces in coastal areas was associated with greater well-being and less mental distress. So is there hope we can fix this? Can we fix this? Yes, we can. There's two-pronged approach: mitigation and adaptation. Mitigation is doing something to decrease the climate, the fossil fuel emissions, decrease the things that are creating climate change. Adaptation is being aware of what's going on, doing what you need to do to adapt to the situation, and that way you're going to be more resilient. A more resilient tree sways with the wind and instead of breaking. So I'm going to go through this pretty quickly, but there are some basic things like increasing our wind use. There has been a lot of increase in wind power in the US, which is exciting. We have enough solar energy to fill all the world's energy needs. I can't see what this last part says, for a full year and every hour. And there is a lot of work being done. And with that work, of course, you're going to get the economies of scale. So solar and wind have decreased in cost. Solar is this yellow line and wind is the blue line. With renewable energy come great jobs. And I put this in here because the Inflation Reduction Act is really exciting. Right now, if we follow the proposals in the Inflation Reduction Act, you can see how that purple line will bring us down to the net zero goals. And there will be a lot of good jobs with that. The change in jobs in 2030 shows that we'll have increased, I'm sorry, I'm not reading this properly, but anyways, we'll get good energy jobs and decreased particulate emission related to implementing pieces of the Inflation Reduction Act would decrease deaths and asthma attacks and avoid lost work days. Now, I wanted to put this in here because this is an example of things you can do locally. This is a project called the Community Power Coalition, and it's actually in the law that communities can get together and determine where they get their energy from. And the goal of this power coalition is that people be able to get more renewable resource energy. This map shows the most recent in June map that they put out showing all of the towns that are either launched, approved, or planning to be part of that. And the last time I had looked at the map, there were many fewer towns on this. So it is really growing. What can you do at the community level? Vote, get active, be part of land use planning in your town, community power projects, like I mentioned, urban forestry projects, supporting that. That's expensive, but it's very valuable. Wetland, things that the Harris Center is already doing. Forest protection, wetland protection, that is going to help sequester carbon, protect us from flooding, protect the water systems to keep them cooler, and decrease toxic algal blooms. Housing cluster developments, I mean, there's a lot to learn about what's good and what isn't good, but I think that looking at our town planning and land use planning is really important to think about how we're going to have our communities be more sustainable going forward. And then individual actions. These are things that you can do right away. You can join a climate group. There's a lot of good climate groups. I put together a list of resources that Brett and Susie will send out to everybody. Included in there is the NH Network, New Hampshire Network. Oh my God, I get an email from them at least every day. They talk about plastics. They talk about energy projects. There is something for everyone in that group. The other thing is to talk about climate. I'll show you that in a sec. Think about your own consumer choices. Decreasing plastics decreases the use of fossil fuels. And, you know, just getting away from fossil fuels wherever you can. Interesting, and it's the last slide. So this is how many people in New Hampshire believe that climate change is happening? 71%. How many believe that we should teach about global warming in schools? 77%. How many people talk about it? 37%. How many people hear about it in the media? 36%. That's a big change from what people believe and what they're talking about. So one of the most important things you can do is talk about it. And I'm hoping that looking at it from the health perspective might give you a way to talk about it that is less difficult for people to hear about. So that was a lot of information. I know it's a lot of slides, but it's hard to figure out which ones to cut out. I'd be happy to take any questions. And thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Cynthia. That was really interesting, a little sad. Not gonna lie, it made me a little sad. Please put your questions into the chat. There are a few questions. One question is, can you explain a little bit more about how increased particulate matter in the atmosphere causes dementia? I haven't.
Yeah, so I don't think that what they're showing is a correlation, and dementia can be caused by a couple of different things. There is Alzheimer's dementia, which is a change in the actual structure of the proteins in your brain. But then there can be dementia that's caused by small vessel disease. And if you've got increased particulate matter in the atmosphere that can get into your vessels, that can cause blood clots, that can get into your vessels of your brain, that can certainly cause damage to your brain. And that is where the connection between the particulate matter and dementia is. Because small vessels can't, blood can't get through those small vessels. And then if you've got blood clots on top of that, you're going to get these little mini clots everywhere. And that causes lack of oxygen. Lack of oxygen causes tissue death. And that's, yeah. Does that make sense?
Yep, that made sense, I think. And here's a question that came in about doxycycline. And is it effective against the other tick-borne diseases like babiosis and
anaplasmosis?
Yeah.
Yes, but a lot, yes, but the primary treatment for those two is supportive treatment. So yes, you want to get treated with the antibiotics right away, but then a lot of times they have to add steroid treatments or manage other symptoms that you might have. With anaplasmosis, sometimes you get altered mental status. And in that case, of course, you need to be kept safe. And the steroid treatment can cause helps to decrease inflammation in the brain. And so that's antibiotics and steroid treatment.
Thank you, Cynthia. And can you talk a little bit about the organization New Hampshire Healthcare Workers for Climate
Yes.
Action? Tell us a little bit like how it got started, who's involved, and how people who might be in the medical field in New Hampshire can get involved, or if you have to be in the medical field.
Thank you. That's a great question. So it's actually a national organization, but each state has a chapter. And when I joined, this was about 1.5 years ago, they were only 6 months old and they were already the most active chapter in the country. So it's called Healthcare Workers for Climate Action. It was started by a cardiologist and a pediatrician, I believe. And then it's run now by one staff person, and then the rest of us are all volunteers. And there's a board, there's 4 groups, the speakers group, education group, a legislative group, and a letters to the editors group. And in fact, the legislative group is proposing that the Department of Health and Human Services brings back a climate and health office that they used to have. So that bill will be in the legislature pretty soon. I put that in the information packet. As far as members, it's MDs, physician's assistants, nurse practitioners, nurses, anybody, medical assistants, anybody that is interested in the healthcare profession. I would think that if people are interested, I think that it's certainly worth going onto the website, even if you're not in the healthcare profession, because there is a ton of information there, and there are webinars there that talk about this exact information in much more detail.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say that's super helpful. There's a question from Gary. I wondered about this also. He's wondering how prevalent is mold problems as a result of wetter seasons?
That's a huge issue. And we need to look more into that to put a nice, concise information together. But of course, if you've got flooding events and then afterwards you can potentially have mold, and there is toxic mold, and any kind of mold can cause respiratory or skin problems. It depends on the person. Some people are much more sensitive than others. There are some molds that are much more toxic than others. So it's really dependent on the situation. The most important thing is to get somebody into the home that knows how to take care of those problems afterwards when you're doing repairs, and make sure to know that there's no molds hiding in the, in the new drywall that got put up.
Thank you, Cynthia. I think that's all we have for questions, and it's just about 6:30 anyway. And I wanna thank you for such a great and informative presentation. And I also want to thank everybody who showed up tonight to hear about it. And let's take Cynthia's message to heart and talk about it. Let's get out in our communities, talk about it, do things that we can, and see if we can make some changes and differences. So,
And we
that's some
can all do
homework.
we can all do something. It's do what you can with what you have where you are. Everybody can contribute.
Well said. I think we'll end on that. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.